everyone, welcome to welfordWEAVES. My name is Rachel and I can be found on Instagram and Ravelry as Welford Pearls. I think on Instagram I'm actually Woolen Spinning. I keep thinking it's my old username. I'm Woolen Spinning on Instagram. I host the bi-monthly podcast called Woolen Spinning here on YouTube, and I hope that you take a few minutes to check that out. If spinning and knitting with our hand spun, working with our hand spun, weaving with our hand spun is something that interests you. So thank you for checking me out and for having a look at the channel. I really appreciate it. I have been working over the last number of months on my Overshot sampler, and this is a sampler that comes from the book by Patty Graver called Next Steps in Weaving. If you're sort of looking for that next step, I would recommend this book. It's been a great book to work through. And specifically, her Overshot sampler gives you the draft for Star of Bethlehem. This was originally published in Marguerite Porter Davidson's book, Pattern Weavers, a hand weaver's pattern book, and it was figure 10 in that original book. And she gives you lots and lots of options for how to weave it. We talked about that on our last episode of welfordWEAVES. So if you are interested in learning more about that and maybe possibly making it yourself, please go ahead and look at our previous episode. I'll link it down below. So I had sort of woven off all of my samples and I cut them off and I had them all to share with you, and I was really excited about them. And it really kind of gave me pause because I was looking through them, and if you weave the pattern just as drawn in, so treadled the same way that it's threaded, this is the pattern that you get. And this is my hand spun. This is Nest Fiber Studios in the Fiddlesticks colorway, and it was chain plied. This is old stash that I used for, this was yarn that I'd spun for the book that Katrina and I wrote called Unbraided. And I sort of, this is the pattern. This is what it looks like. This is woven ends per inch. The tabby ground is woven 20 ends per inch and 20 picks per inch. It worked out really beautifully. I think the pattern looks great. It's a wonderful fabric. It would just be wonderful for a bed covering, maybe some lightweight cushion covers. You could do a lot with this. And I was sort of left wondering about more. I had a little bit of warp left. I wasn't exactly sure how much more I could get off of this warp, but I really liked what I had pulled off already, which I shared in our last episode, like I said. And I wove this on 8/2 mercerized cotton, and then I was throwing in all of this different hand spun and just feeling really excited about it. So I started to play around in Fiberworks, and I just have the free version of Fiberworks, and I am planning on purchasing something at some point. But I just felt like I needed to play around and just see what the options were. I've been reading a lot and looking at a lot of different sources, looking at different theory, working through my own studies and trying to figure out sort of where I want to go with this, and just wanting some ideas for like future projects and whatnot, something that would spark me and spark my interest. So on Fiberworks, I just started playing around and I started testing out my ideas on the loom. So after I had played in Fiberworks with this one, I put the draft in, and we'll go through Fiberworks in just a minute and we'll cut to that. But this is the first sample, and basically what I did, you can see this is the beginning of the warp that I had cut on. From where I cut it off. I just started weaving, and I totally forgot to hem stitch, so I can't really finish this properly. I know there are things I could do. I could run it through the sewing machine, I've just left it. It's just a sample. But I took the Star of Bethlehem and I just lengthened it. I added extra picks in between, and you get just this beautiful star that's just elongated and kind of looks like a child's drawing of a star, where they're kind of big and long, and I just thought that was really pretty. And this is fiber hand spun that was 2-plied, but maybe it was 4-plied, this yarn, but it was old stash from years ago. I think I spun this back in 2014. And then I did a second one, but I was trying to create circles. So this was trying to create circles. They're a little bit flat, a little bit more oval shaped because of how I did the draft. I didn't add enough picks, enough pattern weft picks in between to make it a real circle. So even though this is woven 20 ends per inch, 20 picks per inch, my circles are sort of more oval. But again, same yarn, and it's a little bit denser, so I found it a little bit harder to really beat down really. So this is a bit thicker than this original sample. This is a little bit more supple. There's a little bit more drape to it. It has a really nice hand, whereas this one's a little bit more structured. These ones are a little bit thicker. They feel thicker. They would be really, really lovely for the outerwear. Something warm that you need some air and some warmth insulation. Yeah, they're just thicker. Lower grist yarn. And then I pulled out all of my strawberry season that I had been spinning up and plying and sort of saving in my stash for who knows why. And we're going to go through this one on Fiberworks towards the end of the show today. But you can see how it really got quite intricate. And you've got lots of halftones. You can really see them here in the section where the red is, because you can see those halftones coming through. Those are halftones in there. Right in there. And then you've got the full tabby ground blocks, and then you've got pattern blocks, which just create so much interest and so much depth. I feel like there's a lot of movement in this pattern, and I think if the yarn was a high contrast yarn and the whole thing was high contrast, it would just be really effective. But I think because it's a self-striping yarn and there's some white in it and there's some lighter color, that sort of limey yellowy color, you sort of lose the undulation of the pattern. But I'll show it to you in Fiberworks, and it's very, very effective. I played around with this original treadling. This was that same Sweet Georgia strawberry season again, and again playing with circles. Playing with the effect that circles have, and when you look at it from a distance and at a slight angle, you can really see the circles. And again, you can see the original underlying pattern there. You've got the star in there. I thought this was really effective. Again, I think if you had a high contrast there and you had that red through the entire thing rather than the self-striping yarn, even more effective. But these are samples. It's an opportunity to see how these yarns work up, how these different colors work up on the white ground. It works really, really well. And it's funny when you look at Overshot up close versus from afar. This, to me, is more effective. Your eye sort of sees the shape, whereas when you see it up close, you start to lose some of it. It's not quite as effective as it is from a distance, which is sort of interesting. And then my absolute most favorite sample. It's my most favorite out of all of the samples that I did, even my shadow fashion and some of these original samples that I did. This is my most favorite one, and I'm trying to figure out how to turn this one into something. I'd really like to do something with this one, and this is a combo spin that I did. I did not like the yarn. I abandoned the spin. I ended up using the yarn in a woven scarf. But in Overshot, it's pretty incredible. And I'll take it back from the camera. Again, tons and tons of halftones. Lots of tabby ground blocks. And with this one, the way that I created all of those halftones was 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, and then 2 1 2 3 2 3 4. So I was basically zigzagging along the blocks. So instead of doing continuing in one direction, 1 2 3 4, with the blocks where your 1 2, your 2 3, and your 3 4 are all right after each other for your block, instead I zigzagged it. So 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3, and it zigzagged it, and it created all these sort of blocks in here that look like just blocks. So it's almost like you're combining just blocks with a twill pattern, with a twill treadling, and by putting those two things together and playing with that, you get all of these beautiful undulations in here that create all of those halftones. So much fun. Loved this. So let's get on to Fiberworks, and I'll share with you how I went about doing this and how I what my thought process was. And I hope that it's really helpful. And I'll see you guys on the other side. I have taken the draft that's in the book, and I just wanted to show you sort of how I worked with it in Fiberworks to be able to manipulate it to be what I wanted it to be. Because I didn't want to reslay my reed, and I didn't want to re-thread all of these up here, what I decided to do was just to play around with my treadling. So the treadling doesn't change. So I have my tie up in the upper corner here, in the upper, sort of way over there in the upper right hand corner is the tie up. And I have it tied up as my loom is sort of tied up now. You can change it around. You can make, I think in the book, D block starts at the beginning and it goes, so D, A, B, C, D. D, A, B, C. Other ones I've seen have written them in different orders. D block sometimes starts on 2 and 3. There's all different things. Just be consistent with whatever you want to do. The other thing that we're not going to see here in this is the, we're not going to see the tabby picks in between. So we're only going to be looking at the pattern picks in between and not the tabby picks. The tabby picks are implied as being in between. So what I did with mine was I took this pattern and I looked at it and I sort of thought, well, I wonder what I could do if I sort of treadled it the way that I had treadled it with some of my other stuff. And what if I superimposed some of the patterns that I've superimposed for other things over top? And then I sort of thought, well, what if I did it like relatively randomly? And what are some of the different things that I could achieve? So I started being able to create all of these different types of patterns. And then I sort of decided to really go out on my own and start to really design some relatively random things. But if you pause for a moment and you look at the original Overshot sample of the original pattern woven as drawn in, I was still able to pull out the original pattern and see the star pattern that was originally in there. So I had changed it from the original to this, but really all I was doing was lengthening it. I just added more picks and made the blocks bigger. So then when I started doing things that were more random, the stars started to become more and more elongated. They started to grow this way. In this one, there starts to be circles, and there's a circle around this, but you've still got sort of that basic star shape in there somewhere. And you can really see it up here. If you look, you can really see that star shape taking place in there. And you just sort of have to slow down and see it. So one of the first things that I did was I actually highlighted and took the pattern and I copied it. Control copy, Control C, and I went down here and I clicked on that far box there and I Control V. I pasted it. Et voila, we have the original pattern woven as drawn in. So that means that I'm treadling exactly the same as what is threaded. And that's what gives us this beautiful star pattern. And when we look at it in our weaving, that is exactly what we get. So that is exactly what happens when we go and we weave it as threaded and we treadle it as drawn in. So it's exactly the same threading, exactly the same treadling, and that's the result that we get. And you can see this isn't completely balanced. This was woven a little bit more open than it should have been. My tabby ground, the background, we've talked about that on previous welfordWEAVES episodes, isn't exactly 20 ends and 20 picks. It was a little bit shy. It was like 18 picks. So it's a little bit elongated, just slightly. But to the untrained eye, and if somebody didn't know that, you maybe wouldn't see it right away. And it's the same on both sides. It looks exactly the same. So the way that I can tell that this is the right side is because of the hem stitching. So I took that and I sort of went, well, maybe I could play with this a little bit. And maybe I could sort of, do some fun things with it. So I went into my drawing mode and I chose straight, just straight draw. And this is what I ended up with. Let me just make sure it's the right length. Maybe I won't go quite so long. That's pretty cool. It almost kind of looks a little bit M's and O's-ish, doesn't it? And so we're just treadling A block, B block, C block, D block, A block, B block, C block, D block. And some of you maybe will even recognize that this is just straight draw. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So your blocks are just, you know, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, and so on. So I sort of thought, well, why don't we play with that a little bit? And let's start sort of playing with that. And let's make them into more like what I would consider blocks. So let's elongate them. And so I took the that elongation and I added a second pick of each so that my 1, 2, 3, 4 became 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. And then I went ahead and copied that. And look at how it changes it. And now we've got that same patterning, but it's longer. It's a more pronounced, it's a bolder pattern. The sort of those points are more pronounced. And yet we still only have floats traveling over 4 threads. They're not too long. And in here, we've got areas where they would work up to be more like half tones. And I didn't actually make this one. I did create it and I printed it out, but I never actually wove it because I just started to get so excited. So what I started to do was, to be honest with you, was I went back to some of this other stuff, and this is where it just gets really, really fun. I wove straight draw. Let me just go into freehand here because it's really hard to work with this if it's not in freehand mode. So then I started to just play. And I was like, what happens if we treadled rose path? So let's treadle rose path. 1. And then, and you get these beautiful patterns when you start to put in some of this stuff. So this was rose path. And so on. So then you can take, you can select this and you can copy. And to really get an idea, I find with these patterns, you have to really make them quite long, quite big graphics. You see how big this graphic is now? It's not just a little strip at the top. Like, I like to really make them big and really see. And so this graphic is actually very, very close. It's not exact, but it's very, very close to a point twill that I did. So one of the treadlings that I did was point twill. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And that was actually, let me see if I can find it. That was, oh, I didn't actually weave it. I can't believe it. I wanted to. I was going to. I guess I ran out of room on my warp. That's so funny. One of the other ones that I did was based on rose path, but I actually did 1, 2, 3, 4, and I made my blocks longer. And then I added a transition block in here. And I actually had to make a note to myself because I went 1, 2, I went 1, 1. I did 1, 1, 2, 2 to sort of start to create sort of a bit of a circle. And then I went 3, 3, 3. So A, B, C, 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 D. And then I skipped back down to B to make, to sort of create some interest in the block. But the problem is, as you can see right away, if I keep creating this one and I make it a little bit bigger so that you guys can really see, if I go from here, let me show you what happens. Do you see how in here you get this, these sort of a grid happening almost? You've almost got like these right-hand turns. There's no transition in there. And so it looks like in the woven fabric, it actually looks like a mistake. And so I had to go back and unweave, and I had to figure out how to fix that. And so I'll show you what I did. All right, so to fix that look of a mistake. And to get this final sample that I ended up getting, I had to make some changes actually on the loom. So this didn't work because it looked on the loom like a mistake. When I threw the Strawberry Season yarn, which is the Sweet Georgia Fiber Club from July of 2014, the only reason why I remember that is because it was my first Fiber Club subscription ever. And I could tell on the loom, like it just didn't look quite right. And even though this yarn stripes really badly, when you look at it up close, it looks fluid and it looks like it's the way that it should. And so what I had to do was I actually had to add a transition block. And so in here, there needs to be a transition block. So with Overshot, unlike with something like Monk's Belt where it's woven on opposites and you use those opposite blocks, with Overshot, you have to have a transition thread in between. And so I had sort of forgotten that and had sort of just ignored it basically. So I needed to go from the D block here, either up to A, which is here, or I needed to go down to C. So I'm very visual. So in my mind, it's sort of, if you're going A, B, C, D, it's like an ace. Ace can be high, ace can be low. So A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. So from this block, block D, I had to go either to an A or a C before I could do my B block. And so I put my C block in here. And I just need to put it back into drawing mode. It's super frustrating. I had to put a C block in here and then I could treadle my 2 B blocks. Back up to C, back up to D. And then I could go back down and do my C, 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 B, B, A. And then I could copy it. And it worked. But I needed that transition to be able to make this work. And because otherwise, and you see this written everywhere, otherwise it looks like a mistake. And so now you can see that it's more flowing and that it works. And you get this really, really interesting undulating pattern, just like we see in the draft. So you can see right straight through there, all that those undulations in there. And that you can see, if you look at the draft really closely, you can see that in there in the draft. Isn't that fascinating? So that is how I created these original patterns. And I started to play a lot with circles and trying to make circles. I'll see if I can try to recreate this one for you guys quickly. So that you can see how I did it. So one of the things that I did do was I went based on the draft. So I started off with the D, C, B, A, B, C, D, just like we see up here, D, C, B, A, so that it would start off on the same footing. And this one is my sample number 2, this one. So I was trying to create these areas that were like more like circles. And you can see that in here, there are some treadling errors in here and I lost the place where I was in the pattern in here. But I was trying to sort of play around with this circle motif and how could I recreate these circles. And so I sort of thought, well, I could do 1, 2, and then I could do 1, 2, 3. So A, B, C. And as I built it, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, and you'll see in a moment why I was playing around with this idea of circles, and this idea of trying to create a circle and what that might look like, and how I could potentially create that. Because if you look at this motif here, it's kind of got this circle to it. Because if you take this A block, these 2 A blocks, and you put them up here, because you're just building, right? And you put them up here, it kind of looks like the arc of the side of a circle. And so I could see how I was sort of getting into being able to create a circle and have it look like a circle. And maybe it would look like a circle in my weaving, but that's not, it did. It's not terrible. but it's not perfect either. And actually I just pasted that. You can see immediately that there's a mistake, that I pasted it in the wrong spot, because you see again, you get those right hand angles there. And it's like so obviously a mistake. So I need to move it down one to here. Oops. To here. And then this needs to become an A block. So I need to put it back into drawing mode. And I need to go back to an A block. And then you get this sort of arc of a circle. And sure enough, you've got an arc of a circle here. And if you look in here, look at all of these areas in here. You see how you've got all those dots of that blue in there? It's really high contrast, so it's easy to see. You've got all those dots of blue in there, and those are all half tones. So you should see that in the fabric, and that is exactly what we see at the top here. So at the top where I was able to get back to where I was and sort of I restarted basically in a spot that it made sense. You can see all through here all of those half tones, and that's exactly what we see in our pattern, which is really fascinating. So I just kept playing around, and I just kept playing around with all of the all of this, and I kept, you know, adding and removing things. I took traditional twill patterns. I took point twill and rose path and bird's eye, and what else did I do? M's and O's, and or sorry, not M's and O's, M's and W's. You know, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 3 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, all the way down. I, you know, created some of that kind of stuff, and then starting at the top, you know, M's and W's the other way, and so you've got your M's and your W's going across. 4 3 2 1. I haven't done that quite right, but you guys can sort of get the idea. And then you start to create some of these types of patterns and these types of graphics, and you're just superimposing all sorts of different twill patterns over top and making your own and trying to figure out what might work for you and what you think is aesthetically pleasing. And then you go to the loom and you try it out and you see if it'll work, and you try to get your tabby ground, your background, you know, have your picks and your ends be the same. So, you know, 20 picks, 20 ends should have 20 picks of ground. And if you can't do it, if you can't beat down your tabby ground to get that, then you probably have too bulky of a yarn for your overshot, for your weft pattern, and you maybe need to just find something a little bit lighter, especially if you're working with your hand spun. I found some of my old hand spun, the stuff like this that was from old stash, that were old yarns. They were denser. They didn't have as much air in them as some of my newer yarns, and so they didn't pack down as well, and it was harder for me to get closer to a balanced tabby than it was with some of my newer yarns that had a lot more air in them and packed down a lot nicer. So this was 20 ends per inch and 19 picks per inch. So again, not quite firm enough, but I was getting closer. This one was bang on 20 and 20. So this yarn worked really super well, and this Chevy, it worked really super well. It packed down really nicely, but it made a thicker fabric. This is more of what I would consider an upholstery fabric. And even woven a wee bit firmer would be great for a chair cover or a really hardy cushion cover, or something that would be, you would want to wear really, really super well. So lots and lots to think about. So this is one of the original designs that I came up with based on the Star of Bethlehem threading. And I hope you guys can hear me okay. But basically what I'm doing is working in sort of a modified point twill. So I just did 2 picks of C block, and I'm just going to do a third one because that's what I put into my original design. And then I'm kind of working my way back down the point 12. So that was 3 picks of C, and now I'm going to do 2 picks of B block. I'm just working here with my hand spun. This was Strawberry Season, which was a club colorway from 2014 from Sweet Georgia Yarns. And you can see there's some lighter colors in there, some white. I chain plied this. So I actually had 2 braids of this, and I ended up chain plying one and traditional 3 plying the other one. So I just went all the way back down. So I went from D block all the way back down to A, and now I'm building back up again. So this is my first 2 picks of B block. So that's the first shot of B block, and now I'm going to do a second one. And my tabby ground, my background, which is plain weave, is just following behind. So I just did 2 picks of B. So now I'm going to do 3 picks of C, because that is actually how I designed it. So A, A, B, B, C, 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 D. Because I was just playing. So here comes my 3rd pick of C. And I've actually found that I have become less lost by just practicing, just sitting at the loom, practicing, what comes next. So that's my pick, my single pick of D that finishes it off. And then I'm back down to C, because I threw in 2 picks of B, but I forgot the transition thread, the C thread, to transition. So I had to add in the C, and I'm gonna have to change my draft and fix it. Because otherwise, if I didn't put that extra C thread in there, it would look like a mistake, because it would skip from D down to B, and it would look like a line in the fabric, and it just wouldn't look quite right. So that was C, and now I'm back to D, and then I'm going to go all the way back down again. So D, 3 picks of C, 2 of B, and then A, and then all the way back up again. And I have memorized this just from working on this warp and doing so much playing with it that I just kind of know now what's next, what works, what doesn't work. Something keeps getting caught. I'm gonna have to get underneath and see what's wrong. So that was my 3 picks of C, and now I've got 2 picks of B. As I work my way back down to A. And what my plan was I was just going to weave until I run out of thread on this bobbin. That was kind of my genius plan. and then I'll go on to my next original design and my next. I have 3 more in total. So this one plus 2 more. And then I'm hoping that I'll be toward the end, if not at the end of the warp, and I can move on to other things, basically. Beat, change, beat her back. Beat, change, beat her back. This yarn is really elastic, my hand spun, so I'm really trying not to pull on it too much, but instead just gently place it across the warp so that there's lots of it, lots of weft to be able to fill those spaces and pack down around the tabby. So I have 2 picks of B block next, but I'm just going to advance my warp. Now we've got 3 picks of C block. You can see that high contrast in there. It's from that red. And of course, because it made such a quick transition from the blue to the red in the chain plying, you can see that it kind of almost makes like a line in the weaving. So now I'm turning. I just did my D. So I'm going down to C
my one pick of C. And then 2 picks of B.
So for now, for just this very short period of time, because I will be back to it quickly, this sort of concludes my Overshot sampler for now and the Overshot sampler explorations for now. My plan is to come back to it again when I start my Unit 5 explorations for the Ontario Hand Weavers and Spinners Master Certificate, but I'm going to sort of work on some other things in the meantime and spend my time looking at some different weave structures, and specifically finger manipulated lace, tapestry. I want to get my M's and O's towels off the loom and get those hemmed and ready for gifts for June, and just to sort of have some like practical things that I need to work on. So for now, I am putting my Overshot sampler aside, and I will absolutely be coming back to this in the future. So those are all of my samples. Super, super fun. Thank you for watching. Bye, everyone.